philosophy venues, is the author of How to Be a Stoic, which has sold hundreds of thousands of copies to people who are interested in Stoicism. And it's my pleasure to introduce him to you today to talk about character, and I hope you enjoy it. Thank you.
All right, well, thanks for coming and thanks for having me here. What I want to talk to you today is not really much about Stoicism, although there will be a few things about Stoicism. It's mostly about character, and we'll see. I'll explain why character is so important and what we do about it. But just to give you an incentive to stick through the whole thing, the first two good questions I get, they'll get a free book. So yeah. All right. The first thing I think. The first thing that we need to talk about a little bit is why are we still paying attention to Greco-Romans? These people were alive 2 millennia ago, 3.5 millennia ago. And yet we're still talking about Aristotle, why? It's a good question. So let's answer that one first. Well, first of all, because they, together with a bunch of other people from different traditions, including Eastern traditions, such as Buddhism, Confucianism, Taoism, and so on, they just got some stuff right. They got something right about human happiness, human flourishing, and we haven't really improved that much on what these folks were thinking. Yeah, some of the details are different. Some of the modern science adds a few interesting twists, but by and large, a lot of these traditions got quite a bit right. So if it works, why do you need to change it or fix it? The second reason is that, again, a variation on the first one. If something has withstood the test of time, and these things certainly have, these philosophies have been used as a guide to life for a long, long time, then it seems like it's a good idea, instead of starting from scratch, to just take a look at those. And yes, then update them as much as it is needed or possible with modern insights from both philosophies. Also, we're talking about ethics, not natural philosophy or what we would take all science. So if you're a physicist or a biologist, I would not recommend to go back to Aristotle and to learn physics or biology, because pretty much everything that Aristotle said about physics and biology is superseded. There's not much use there. It's historically very important, right? It's a history of ideas, but you're not going to read Aristotle and all of a sudden be up with your quantum mechanics or with your Darwin or anything like that. So it's not going to happen. But the situation is very different for ethics. In the case of ethics, as I said, not only these people got quite a bit right, but in my opinion, actually some of the moderns got a number of things quite wrong. And so we've actually gone backwards instead of forward. I'm talking Kant and utilitarianism, which I think are profoundly misguided as a way of thinking about ethics. So now that's controversial. Of course, a lot of people in the form of philosophy probably disagree with me on this count. But at the very least, we can have a conversation. And in fact, modern moral philosophers are having this conversation. Until a few decades ago, the only two players in moral philosophy were Kantian deontology and utilitarianism, or one of its variations. Now, a recent survey about professional moral philosophers actually shows that there is about equal split between these first two and virtue ethics. And virtue ethics is the umbrella term for the Greco-Roman approach that we're going to talk about today, which is focused on character, which is focused on ethics. And people see this like, well, a little bit less light might be useful. Imagine. All right, so that out of the way, and why the Greco-Romans, let me also explain a little bit about why we're talking about philosophies of life in the first place. What is a philosophy of life, and who needs it? So in my mind, a philosophy of life is something, it's a way of looking at the world that has two or three components. And these components are metaphysics, which is an account of how things work. we want to have an idea of how the world works, because you're living in the world. So presumably you want something, know something about how the whole thing hangs together. They have an ethics that is an account of how we should behave in the world, given the way the world works. And then you have a set of practices. And these are meant to help you actually put into practice into your daily life what you think about the ethics. Every philosophy of life that I know of has these three components. And let me show you some examples. For instance, let's say Christianity and Buddhism, those are religions. Well, Christianity definitely is a religion. Whether Buddhism is a religion or philosophy of life, it's actually that word of it. It doesn't matter. Philosophy of religions, in my mind, are just a subset of philosophies of life. They're fundamentally the same thing. So how do they do in terms of these three criteria that I just mentioned? Well, let's take a look at Christianity first. This slide was meant to be building little by little, but this is PowerPoint, and it doesn't talk very well with that whole keynote. So apologies for some of the slides are not working the way I intended them. So metaphysics. Christians say there is a benevolent God that created the world, among other things. Right? In terms of ethics, you follow the Ten Commandments, the teachings of Jesus, and that sort of stuff. In terms of practice, you pray, you go to communal activities in the church, reading, you read and reflect on scriptures. So you can see all three of them. Good, similar thing. Metaphysics, which is very different, based on things like the cycle of birth and rebirth, karma, forth. Yeah, it's also is very different. It's based on the four noble truths in the eightfold path to enlightenment. But still, there is an ethics. And the practice is also very different. You have different kinds of meditations, meditation to deflate ego, loving kindness meditation, and stuff like that. But you can see the structure is very similar. And the same goes for the Greco-Roman philosophies of life, like Stoicism, Epicureanism. Now, if we count religions among philosophies of life, then pretty much everyone on earth has a philosophy. Those are numbers, approximate numbers of people that consider themselves Christian, Muslim, Hindu, and so on and so forth. Yeah, you can. If you sum it up, you get pretty much everybody on earth. It's very hard to imagine somebody who doesn't actually have a religion or philosophy. And even if they tell you that they don't, it's just because they don't recognize it. The point is, we're talking about something that concerns everyone. And if it concerns everyone, then we might want to think about it a little bit from time to time. If we actually all have a philosophy of life, often that philosophy of life is just taken on board without questioning because you inherit it from your environment, from your parents, from whatever else. From time to time, it might be worthwhile to just stop it and say, is this really a good idea? Are there alternatives that need to work out? Right? So the real question, in fact, is not whether you have a philosophy of life, you probably do. The question is whether it's a good philosophy of life. Okay. Well, how do we know that a philosophy of life is good or not? I mean, there are largely two criteria. First of all, is it useful? And second of all, is it coherent? Useful for what? Well, is it conducive to human flourishing in general and to your flourishing in particular? So are you doing well by following that philosophy of life? And we can unpack, of course, what doing well means, but I'll talk about that in a few minutes. But nevertheless, it has to be useful. If it's not useful, this is practical philosophy, which a lot of people think of it as an oxymoron, contradiction in terms, but it's not. Practical philosophy is a thing, and if it has to be practical, it has to work. If it doesn't work for you, then you're not doing it right, or it's not the right thing for you. Also, it's a philosophy, so it has to be coherent. It's meaning that you don't want to follow a philosophy of life that has internal contradictions. First of all, because it's inelegant. Nobody wants to live by contradiction, or few people do. And also, it's going to get you into trouble, because if there are internal contradictions, then there will be times when you're going to try to apply your philosophy to a specific problem, and you don't know which way to go, because there are different mutually contradictory ways that are being suggested. Notice that one thing that is not on this slide is whether that philosophy is true. Because in my mind, it doesn't make any sense to ask whether a philosophy is true. It makes sense to ask whether it's coherent. It makes sense to ask whether it's working, but what is true. Philosophy is not in the business of being true. Scientific theories are in the business of being true. Right? So if I say, is quantum mechanics true? That question makes sense. And what I mean is, does quantum mechanics do a good job of predicting the results of experiments? So the results of observations about the world. If it does, then I have good reason to think that it's true or approximately true. If it doesn't, then I have good reason to think that it's not true. But in the case of philosophy, what are you going to point your telescope in order to figure out whether Confucius was right or Jesus? So truth doesn't enter into it. Now, as I said a minute ago, for every Greco-Roman philosopher of life, and there's a bunch of them out there, but there's more actually, but it's not a complete list. Character, it turns out, would be a crucial component of it, and that's why today I want to talk about character. That fellow, stern-looking fellow there, basically, Marcus Aurelius, who was a Roman emperor, and one of those famous historians. So we're not going to talk about specific philosophy, but the general thing is the Greco-Roman approach, which is also known as the virtue of ethics. We're going to talk about character, and I already used the word virtue several times, so we're going to get into what virtue is. This is the book from where this stuff is taken. Obviously, I don't have time to go through the entire book today, so I'm going to give you 5 take-home messages from what I wrote on this topic. Insight number 1, if you're not virtuous, don't get into politics. I know what you might be thinking. Then every politician that is active today should probably get out. And I would agree. I think that would probably be a good idea, somewhat more so than others, I guess. But it would be pretty good idea. So, what does that mean? If you're not virtuous, don't get into politics. Let me tell you a little story about these 2 fellows. Alcibiades is the guy on the left, and Socrates, the guy on your right. Presumably, Socrates doesn't need any introduction. Arguably, the most famous philosopher of all time, at least in the Western tradition. He was alive in Athens near the end of the 5th century BC. One of his friends, and sometimes students, and possibly lovers, was the fellow on the left, Alcibiades. Now, Alcibiades was an interesting character. I'm still puzzled by the fact that there is, as far as I know, there is nobody's done a movie or a television series on Alcibiades' life, because this guy was quite a character. He was impossibly handsome. He was uber rich. He came from 2, not 1, but 2 of Athens' most distinguished noble families. He was courageous. He was, funny. He was obviously very good with women and with men. Doesn't matter. So this guy had everything. Naturally, therefore, what does he do? He wants to get into politics because he thinks he's so good that he better be running Athens, because that's really going to be good for the country and for himself. But he's a student of Socrates, so he goes there. He goes to Socrates, and at the time he's about 20 years old. Socrates is about 20 years older than Alcibiades. He goes to Socrates and asks for advice. Should he go into politics or not? Should he present himself in front of the Athenian assembly and ask to be elected general or fellow in charge? Now, to give you a little bit of background here, this is just at the beginning of the Peloponnesian War. The Peloponnesian War was a long conflict, lasted 20 years between Athens and Sparta, and that eventually ended up with the defeat and pretty much destruction of Athens. But that's way down the road. At this point, when this dialogue is about to happen, the war is just at the beginning. The Athenians are actually doing pretty well under the guidance of Pericles, who was in fact Alcibiades' adopted father. So things are looking up pretty well, and Alcibiades wants a piece of the action. He's young, but he thinks that he can actually contribute positively to what's going on. So he goes to Socrates, and what follows is essentially a sort of moral interview, where Socrates starts asking questions to Alcibiades, not necessarily practical questions, as like, so how would you move the army around, or what kind of things would you do in terms of foreign policy? He asks about Alcibiades' motivation. Why do you want to do this stuff? Why do you want to get into it? You have everything you need possibly want already. Why are you going into it? And Alcibiades fails the text very clearly and spectacularly, in fact, because it turns out he's not going to do that. He doesn't want to do that because he wants to do good for the Athenians, for his fellow Athenians. He wants to do that because he wants glory for himself. He's a narcissist. I don't know if you noticed, but there are a number of narcissists in national politics recently. And having a narcissist in charge, usually it's not good. So Socrates says, no, I'm sorry, you're just not going in the right direction. In fact, from the dialogue, here's what Socrates says at one point. Alas, Alcibiades, what a condition you suffer from. I have an opinion, but it must be said. You are wedded to stupidity, that's the matter, of the most extreme sort. As the argument accuses you, and you will accuse yourself. So this is why you're leading to the affairs of the state before you've been educated. Now, what the hell is he talking about? Alcibiades is definitely not stupid. He's many things, but he's not stupid. But the word that Socrates actually uses there often, although it is often translated as stupidity, actually means something more like unwise. You lack wisdom. You're not doing the things that you think you're doing for the right reasons. You don't know yourself. You don't question why you're doing these kind of things. And that is why you're going to make it. You're going to have it. It's going to be a disaster. You actually go in the process. It's going to be a disaster. Sure enough. What do you think happened? Did Alcibiades, how many people think Alcibiades followed Socrates' suggestion of just one who's married way and never got into politics? Yeah. All right. Exactly. So he did exactly the opposite. And it didn't go well. Alcibiades was arguably personally responsible for, at least in part, for the defeat of the Athenians. He did all sorts of bizarre things. He was at some point accused of impiety by the Athenians, and they sent out for his arrest. He defected. He left Athens in the middle of a very perilous military operation of the Athenians on the basis of Alcibiades' suggestion and advice, decided to open a second front in the war and go to Sicily, but attack Syracuse, because they thought that was going to be a cakewalk. Instead, the Syracuse beat the crap out of the Athenians, destroyed their navy, killed or made or enslaved 20,000 of their men. So it was a major disaster. In the middle of this, what does Alcibiades do? He defects to Sparta, the arch enemy of the Athenians. So he's in Sparta. Spartans welcome him because he's a smart guy. He can give them very good advice on how to defeat the Athenians. But he's not happy enough about that. So what does he do? He seduces the queen, the king's wife, the queen, and gets her pregnant. That's not a good move when you're a guest. You don't get your host wife pregnant. So now the Spartans are after him and want to kill him. So he defects again, he moves again, and he goes to where? To Persia. Persia was the arch enemy of both Sparta and Athens. And now the Persians are very happy to have Alcibiades along with their counselors. But guess what? Things are not going well there either. So he has to flee the Persians as well. The Athenians, unbelievably, actually welcome him back several years later. He gets back on the saddle, back into charge, but then from then on, he also makes a couple of blunder mistakes. And finally, everybody is after him, and this is the final scene of his life. He's trying to escape. Both the Spartans and the Persians were after them. The Athenians are not even bothering at this point. So a bunch of people are sent to kill him. He's up in the mountains trying to hide with his newest mistress. He's in his 40s at this point. He's still such a powerful man and warrior that people are afraid. They surround his house, but nobody wants to believe. Get him out. So he comes out yelling his battle cry with his sword in one hand, the shield on the other, naked, because he didn't have time to dress. And they kill him from a distance with a bunch of arrows. Nobody dared actually engage in personal conduct. So, what is the moral of this story? Socrates was right. Outsiders should never have gone into this thing. But his story is so fascinating that it's really an amazing tale from. Okay, so lesson number one: if you're a narcissist, if you're not virtuous, if you're not doing it for the right reason, don't get into politics. Because politics is about, the word comes from polis, which is was the city-state in ancient Greece. It literally means getting involved with social well-being. Modern politicians, in modern terms, politics has a very bad reputation. Politicians are among the lowest, have the lowest reputation among most categories in the United States. But to be a politician just means to be trying to be helpful to others, to try to help other people, live better. So that's the first message. Don't do it if you don't do it for the right reason, because it's already a difficult job as it is. If you do it for the wrong reason, you may end up bias. Or considering some other positions, hopefully going out outside of this. Insight number two. Virtue can and should be taught. So, Alcibiades was not virtuous, but what the heck is virtue in the first place? The word today is kind of has a stuffy sort of aura. I said, oh, virtues mean I don't have to have sex before marriage or something like that. That's the Christian version of virtue. It has to do with purity and chastity and things like that. The Greeks were not into that. Forget about chastity and purity. That was not what they were talking about. They were talking about having a good character, because a good character allows you to make good decisions. Good decisions give you and everybody around you good life. So let's take a look at what virtue underlies character, and whether in fact it can be taught. That is, can you become virtuous because somebody teaches you how? Can you improve your virtue? First of all, what is it? Let me give you 4 examples of virtues. So we're talking about something concrete. As I said, this has nothing to do with purity, chastity. This is faith in charity, purity, and chastity. Yeah, those are the 4 Christian. Here are some examples. These are called the 4 cardinal virtues, and they're particularly popular. They were particularly popular among the Stoics, but they're actually common with all the Greco-Roman philosophers. Wisdom, meaning the knowledge of what is truly good or evil. Alcibiades lacked wisdom, as I said, right? When Socrates says you were stupid, he actually says you're unwise. He doesn't know the difference between good and evil. He thinks that fame and money is good, and he doesn't seem to care for the things that are really good, which is helping other people flourish and that sort of stuff. Justice, understood by the Greco-Romans as acting fairly toward others and respecting them because they're human beings. So justice here is not a general theory of justice as we think of it today. It's a character trait. It's you act justly if you treat other people fairly and fairly, which Alcibiades did. Courage. Now, courage, we tend to think of courage as the ability to rush into danger. The soldier, for instance, like Alcibiades. But that's not what the Greco-Romans actually meant. This is moral courage. It's courage of doing the right thing. And doing the right thing often, not always, but often does require courage because there are consequences. You might be suffering consequences for standing up for somebody or for doing the right thing, right? So it's moral courage, not just bravery on battlefield. There is, for instance, for the Greco-Romans, no such a thing as a courageous Nazi. There may be a brave Nazi, somebody who's a Nazi soldier and goes into the battlefield and exposes himself to danger, but it's not courage because it's doing it for the wrong reasons. Not moral courage. And then finally, temperance, which is the ability to restrain yourself and do things in the right measure, neither too much nor too little. Those 4 are called the 4 cardinal virtues. Now, the question is, can we actually learn to be more or less courageous, wise? Well, we want to learn more courageous, wise, and so on, not less. Now, the word itself, virtue, comes from the Latin virtus, which however itself is a translation of the Greek arete or arete. And that means excellence. So really, the virtues mean to eat the best that you can eat. In our case, we're talking about the best human being in the yeah. I'll tell you what that might look like. But in fact, the word arete applies to everything, not anything that has a function, including inanimate objects. For instance, not too many weeks ago, I went out and I bought a knife like that. And I wanted an arete knife, an excellent knife. What is an excellent knife? It's a knife that cuts properly, right? That is very sharp, that does its job in the best way possible, as opposed to be blunt, so that you cut not only what you want to cut, but also your fingers, something like that, right? That's not an arete. So arete, virtue, in this sense, means being excellent at whatever the function that object or that living organism has. Right? So an arete knife is a knife that cuts very well. An arete plant is a plant that captures light very well through photosynthesis, that sort of stuff. So what is an arete human being then? Well, the answer to that again comes from etymology in this case. Ethics, the word ethics, derives from the Greek ethos, which Cicero, who was a Roman, ancient Roman orator, philosopher, statesman, translated ethos as morales in Latin, which is where we get the word moral. So ethics and morality in this particular context, at least, they're synonymous. They're literally one is the translation. And both of those terms refer to having a good character and having the ability, consequently, and the ability for good social living. So an excellent human being is one who has a good ability to live with others. Why? Because we're inherently social animals. So our function literally is, according to nature, literally is to coexist and cooperate with other people, because that's how we make a living. That's how human beings actually work. That's how human beings work. That, and another thing, reason well. Because we're also, our major evolutionary weapon, as we will put it today, is reason. We don't have big muscles compared to other animals. We don't run fast. We don't fly. We don't have big fangs. We don't have anything that a lot of other animals have in terms of weaponry. We have this thing that allows us to solve problems, especially in cooperation with other people. So we would say today, in evolutionary terms, it's reasoning and cooperating as a group that really has made human beings so successful on planet Earth. And so a good functional human being, from a Greco-Roman perspective, is somebody who thinks well and cooperates with others and acts well. That's what virtue is, right? So that's what that's. An excellent human being is an ethical or moral human being, but not in the modern sense of this is not about moralizing, right? It's not as in oh, you need to be moral or else. It's you need to be moral in the sense of you need to reason well and cooperate with others because that is who you are. That's what you're supposed to do naturally. If you do that, then you work well. Then your life is going to work. If you don't do well, then your life is not working. Okay. Okay, so that's virtue. Can it be taught? Now, this is in a discussion here about whether the virtue can be taught. That goes back literally 2.5 millennia. And Socrates himself changed his mind about this. There's one of the Platonic dialogues where he said, "No, I don't think so." And well, why don't you think so, Socrates? Because I look around and I don't see any good teachers of virtue. Virtue could be taught, and you can see teachers. Instead, what I see is, and also you would think that parents would be able to teach virtue to their kids. And I see a lot of unvirtuous kids coming out of virtuous parents. Alcibiades being one example. It's like, nah, I don't think it can be. But then he has another conversation with a guy named Protagoras, who's a sophist. Was a sophist of all things. I say of all things because the sophists were completely were a group that was very strongly disparaged by Plato. who wrote this document. It's called the Protagoras. And yet Protagoras manages to convince Socrates at the end of that dialogue that, yeah, in fact, virtue actually can be taught. One of the arguments that he uses, it's an interesting analogy, says that virtue is a practical skill. In Greek, it's a techne. And if it is, then it can be taught, because techne can be taught. So it's analogous to learning how to play a musical instrument. We can all do that. Some of us are, of course, naturally better at playing musical instruments. Some of us have this gift for music, and others don't. And of course, the ones that do are going to go on and excel and possibly play a Carnegie Hall. Right? Most of us are not going to play the Carnegie Hall, but the idea is that everyone, unless you're completely tone deaf, everyone can improve their musical skills. You can be taught. Just because you're taught and you do your exercise, it doesn't mean you're going to be a concert level performer, but you can certainly put together a team. The same idea, says, goes for virtue. There are some people who are naturally really, really good at thinking and cooperating with other people, but all of us have that ability, except the equivalent of the moral equivalent of a tone deaf person. Who would that be? More like a psychopath. If your brain really is wired in a way that is completely antisocial, then you might not be able to actually learn how to play by the rules. But other than those people, and those people are a little bit sick, they have a deficiency. Everybody else can improve by being taught by exercise. So that was lesson number 2. Insight number 3 is the notion that good character is an inside job, meaning that it's up to you to work on it. Nobody can improve your character for you. People can teach, just like nobody can play music for you. Right? You have to be the one to play. People can give you pointers. They can help you out. With like, if you do this, you're more likely to improve. If you do that, that's bad form. You're not going to improve. But at the end of the day, you are the only one that can play. Nobody can play it for you. And similarly, at the end of the day, nobody can actually make you a better person. You can make yourself. Now, in the book, I consider a number of historical examples. I also consider modern literature in psychology about this kind of stuff, and we'll get to that in a few minutes. But I started out by considering a number of examples of people who were taught how to be virtuous, and I looked at cases where the teaching didn't go very well, failed, and then in cases where the teaching went better, it actually worked out somewhat, at least. So these are 3 cases where things didn't go well. Plato tried to teach Dionysius the first, who was the tyrant of Syracuse, and he almost lost his life as a result. It didn't go well. The guy Dionysius sold later in slavery, and he had to be bought out by his friends. Okay, fine. Plato, several years later, not having learned his lesson apparently, went back to Syracuse. Remember, this is the very same Syracuse that the Athenians attacked and were completely defeated. We're talking about a few years later. The Peloponnesian War now is over. Athens has been defeated. But Plato goes back and tries with Dionysius' son, Dionysius II of Syracuse. That doesn't work either. Eventually, Plato ends up at house arrest in Syracuse, and he has to be freed by a number of friends who come down from another Latin city to plead for his freedom. That didn't work out. Seneca, a Stoic philosopher alive in the 1st century of the modern era, tried to advise and to teach the young Emperor Nero, and that didn't go very well either. Nero is the one that often is accused of having actually burned Rome just for his own pleasure. He didn't. Really. But that gives you an idea of just how well he's considered in history. And eventually, in fact, Seneca tried to retire because he saw that it was impossible to get anything done with this guy. And since Nero didn't like that, and eventually accused Seneca of being part of a conspiracy and invited him to commit suicide. which Seneca had to do. So those didn't go very well. Why not? Because in all those three cases, the person who was receiving the instruction was recalcitrant. They just did not care. That was not their priority. That was not what they were got into the business for in the first place. You can think of it this way: it was already too late. These people were already adults. Leo was younger; he was a teenager, but in 17. But it didn't work because these people had no. It's like trying to teach music, musical instrument, which has absolutely no intention of music, right? It's just not access. Hopefully, it's not going to sell you into slavery or put you into house arrest. But it didn't work. These are cases that work better, not perfectly, but better. Very briefly, that's up on the left is Alexander the Great being taught by Aristotle. That actually worked pretty well, in the sense that Alexander really did incorporate a lot of Aristotle's lessons. He went throughout the rest of his life with Aristotle notes on the Iliad and with pillow. And he always said that that was the best weapon for life that he had actually ever acquired. That's Cicero in the middle, up middle, is Cicero denouncing in the Roman Senate, as Cicero there, denouncing the Roman Senate his guy, Catiline, who was involved in a conspiracy to take over the Roman government. Cicero had an exemplary life from that perspective in terms of trying to apply his philosophy to his politics. He was both a very famous, very accomplished philosopher and a very accomplished politician. Cato the Younger was another Stoic. He was an arch-enemy to Caesar because he thought that Caesar was a tyrant. And so again, he tried to do the right thing. He eventually did not succeed because Caesar defeated him in battle. And but you don't control outcomes. You only control the attempts to your intentions. Dion of Syracuse is the third guy that Plato tried to influence. And finally, the third one, he actually got it right. That's because Dion was in fact a student of Plato. He did get in charge of Syracuse for a few years until he was killed. And he did fairly well by all accounts. So he certainly did try to put in practice the teachings of his philosophy advisors. That's Marcus Aurelius. We already met him. He was a Stoic also. He used his philosophy throughout his reign as an emperor. He had to deal with a lot of very bad situations, a lot of setbacks. He had two frontier wars on the east and on the north of the Roman frontier. There were people trying to take, and he had to repel them. He had to deal with an internal rebellion. He had to deal with a huge flood of the Tiber River in Rome that killed a bunch of people. He had to deal with a gigantic earthquake in Smyrna, which is modern Western Turkey, that half destroyed the city. And he had to deal with the Antonine plague, which was a plague that killed, the worst plague in antiquity, killed 3 million people. And yet, somehow managed. And his philosophy helped him manage these things. And then finally, Julian, known as the Apostate, he was the last Roman emperor, pagan emperor. He was the last one that tried to reverse the tide of Christianity. That's why he's known today as the Apostate, which is not confident. That's because that's a Christian. Christians getting back. But he did pretty well. He died fairly young. Now, what's the difference between these folks and the previous group? Well, these are all people who actually embrace the teachings of their philosophy from early on. Marcus Aurelius started getting interested in philosophy when he was a teenager. The same goes with Plato. The same goes with Cicero. Alexander himself was very young when he was taught by Aristotle, and so on. So the bottom line here is just like you would expect. Again, think of the analogy with playing music. If you have the interest, if you want to do it, then the teaching works. If you have absolutely no interest in becoming a better person, then that's on you. There's no teacher in the world that can actually reverse that. Insight number 4. We should all be philosophers. But of course, I'm a philosopher, so of course I would tell you everybody should be a philosopher. I'm not the first one. Plato said the same thing. But we don't mean by that, I don't mean that if you're a professional academic philosopher, I don't mean that you should go out and get a PhD in philosophy and then teach philosophy for the rest of your life. I mean, if you want to do that, fine. But it has got nothing to do with what we're talking about. So it's not a philosopher in this sense. I don't know how many people here have ever watched A Good Place. If you haven't, and you're interested in philosophy, you should. It's a very funny, very philosophical form sitcom. And one of the main characters is guy named Chidi, who is a professional academic philosopher, and he does exactly all the kinds of things you would expect from a cartoon version of an academic philosopher. He never gets into his mind. It's too complicated. He always second guesses himself. If you have never seen it, just go on YouTube and look up A Good Place, Trolley Dilemma, and you'll see what I mean. It's one of the best methods of reading charts. It's very fun. Not that guy. That guy. That's Socrates. Right. In other words, a philosopher here is somebody who actually embodies a particular philosophy as a way of life. Not as a theoretical discipline that you write papers about that 12 people in the world would read, but as a day-to-day operation in your life. How do you do that? Well, for instance, a philosopher in the non-academic sense, in the broad sense of the term. Oh, as you probably know, philosopher just means lover of wisdom, not lover of publishing academic papers. Well, that's really something. So lover of wisdom. So, and who wouldn't want to be wise? So how would you do that? Well, one example comes from the Stoics. The Stoics use the 4 cardinal virtues as a kind of moral compass, for instance. Right? So they ask themselves, whatever they were doing, small things or big things, small decisions or big decisions, they were asking themselves, well, is this wise, is it courageous, is it just, is it temperate? The answer is yes to all 4 of the above, then I do. If the answer is no to at least one of them, then I don't, or I revise what I'm about to do. So I'm using those as a moral compass, which is exactly what a Christian is supposed to do in the same way. I mentioned before the 3 additional Christian virtues, faith, hope, and charity. But the Christians actually recognize 7 virtues total, and the first 4 of those are the same. They just took them from the Greco-Romans. A philosopher, in the sense that we're talking about, also strives for ethical self-improvement. By practicing certain exercises. So there are certain things you can do, and I'll tell you in a minute I'll give you a couple of examples of this in a minute. There are, just like if you're a Christian, you reflect on the scriptures and you pray and stuff like that, or if you're a Buddhist, you meditate, you engage in different kinds of meditation. If you are a philosopher in the Greco-Roman tradition, there are certain things you can do in practice. And then you're mindful of applying those ethical rules and precepts that your philosophy teaches you in the day-to-day situations. Like for instance, this is one of my favorite Epictetus was a Stoic philosopher. Epictetus famously said that some things are up to us and other things are not up to us. Meaning that you're responsible for some things, you're not actually reasonably responsible for others, that a good life is the result of accepting that there are some things that are not up to you, and those things you need to just take them for what they are, accept them with a meaning, and focus your attention where your agency is actually efficacious, where the things that are up to you. Right? Really talk about examples in Q&A if you like. Fun, insight number 5. What works and doesn't work when it comes to improving your character? So we talked about virtue, we talked about character. I'll try to explain why I think those are important. Virtues are character traits, essentially. Right? So being temperate is a character trait. The ingredients character trait. So what do we know about what works and doesn't? This is where modern science comes in, and it confirms largely the insights of the Greco-Romans, and then it also adds some interesting suggestions of itself. After all, we made some progress in the last 2000 years. So let me run very quickly through some things that don't work and a few things that actually do work. Let's start with what does not work. And if you're interested, other than looking at the Greco-Roman tradition, there's a great book by Christian Miller called The Character Gap. That actually goes into some detail on the basis of modern critical evidence. Doing nothing doesn't work. Perhaps it's not surprising, but lots of people say, oh, you get wiser as you get older. No, you don't. You get crankier as you get older, not wiser. You get wiser by experience if you reflect critically on your experiences. But that's not doing nothing. Just the passage of time doesn't make you wiser. It just makes you crankier. You're not paying attention. So don't wait to be wise, become wise. It's not going to happen. It would be like saying the more time I spend with my saxophone in my hands, the better I become in playing music. No, you don't. You just have cranks after a while because you're holding the saxophone. Virtue labeling, telling somebody that they're good when they're not, that they're smart when they're not, that they're conscientious and honest when they're not, doesn't work. It's a very common practice nowadays to, oh, we should encourage our kids and tell them that everybody wins. Now, if everybody wins, then nobody wins. If everybody gets a medal, then nobody gets a medal. It doesn't matter. It's an interest. And sure enough, now we have pretty good visual evidence that that kind of stuff does not work. The other thing that doesn't work is nudging. Nudging is a thing in modern psychology. It does work for certain things. You may have seen examples of it. Most of you are probably not old enough to have a retirement plan, but now, for instance, one of the things that companies do is they automatically enroll you in the retirement plan instead of asking you to file a paper. And so you have to opt out if you don't want it. In other words, they make the default be enrolled as opposed to not being enrolled. That little difference there is enough, and more people just stay there because they don't want to be bothered to file paperwork for changes. So if you want to nudge somebody towards a certain kind of behavior, you change the environment, change the situation. One of my favorite ones is probably more familiar to the man in this room. There are lots of airports around the world where you go and you go to the urinal and you see a little fly, the image of a little fly on the urinal, so that you can actually hit it. The reason for that is because research shows that if you don't do that, if you're making for game, basically, people just urinate all over this, and then people are clean after that. So it's a tiny little thing. It's nudging does work. However, it robs people of agency. Those are not their decisions. The person is not enrolling in the retirement plan because he's actually conscientious about retirement and finances, etc., etc. The guy that goes to the urinal is not reading out because he realized that's not a good thing to do. It's just because he's involved in a game. So it's not going to improve your cat because it bypasses nudging by definition of the way it operates. It actually bypasses your agency. It's not going to be great. The things that do work. One is to adopt role models. If you go to the South, where I spent several years of my life in Tennessee, for instance, you see a lot of people with a bracelet that says WWJD. What would Jesus do? That's picking a role model. Right? So the idea is that you remind yourself constantly that that should be your standard. To me, that's a little too high of a standard. I can't believe Jesus. So I ask myself, what did Jesus would do? That's a little lower standard. But that's the same idea. We find evidence in modern economic science that this thing actually does work. When people think of a role model that they've selected, somebody that they respect, they actually tend to behave better. And we find this in the Greco-Roman tradition as well. We have a saying that says, choose therefore a Cato as a possible role model. Or the Cato, that's the same Cato we encountered earlier, Caesar Argentine. If Cato seems to severe a model, choose not Lelius or generous spirit, choose a master whose life, conversation, and soul expressing face have satisfied you. Picture him always to yourself as your protector or your pattern. For we must indeed have someone coming to whom we may regulate our character. We can never straighten that which is crooked unless we leave the rule. So, for instance, one of my role models is my grandfather. because he was a really nice, kind person, and every time that I find myself in a situation difficult to navigate, I have myself literally, what under those conditions, and you try to pattern yourself. Another thing that works is to seek or avoid, depending on the circumstances, on purpose, situations that test your character. You want to test your character under controlled situations. For instance, things like I'm going to go out tonight for dinner. Well, I'm going to decide ahead of time that I'm not going to order certain kinds of foods. I'm going to order other kinds of food because they help you. You do that ahead of time, and you test yourself. Am I actually able to do that? So you either expose yourself or avoid certain situations. Avoiding one of the classic examples in psychology is if you think you need to stay away from desserts. The best way to do it is when you go grocery shopping, you simply skip the entire aisle. You don't go there, pick an ice cream, put it in your freezer, and then tell yourself, I'm going to be okay with this. I'm going to just have it once in a while. Once it's in your freezer, it's a constant temptation. And people's ability to resist temptation is very limited, as it turns out. Willpower is a limited supply. So a better trick is to simply exercise your willpower once a week at the supermarket. You just skip the aisle. And at that point, if you have a craving for ice cream at 2 o'clock in the morning, now the bar is pretty hot. You have to get out, get dressed, get in the car. You can do it, but it's like, yeah, okay. Again, this is something we find engaging here is because provoked by the sight of a handsome man or a beautiful woman, you will discover within you the contrary power of self-restraint. Faced with pain, you will discover the power of endurance. If you're insulted, you will discover patience. In time, you will totally be confident that there is not a single impression that you will not have the more than you to tolerate. Notice the word in time. That if this is something that one does on a regular basis, so it's an exercise. And the more you do it, the better you get. Just like, again, playing an instrument or going to the gym. If you go to the gym only once, and you say, okay, those are the weights, those are the machines, yeah, good. And then you walk out, that's not going to do much for your capacity or your muscle. But if you go there on a regular basis and you exercise on a regular basis, then you will see results. Paying attention, because nothing has ever been improved by not paying attention. There are different ways of paying attention, but here's the big deal again. And not sneak independent ideas if you have a bracket of each week of the day, however, what done or less than done. So start and sort of review your acts, and then from vital needs, try yourself to the left. This is a technique that is known as philosophical journaling, which is also recommended by modern behavioral therapists. And essentially what you do is before you go to bed, you take a few minutes, you open up your laptop or your tablet or God forbid an actual piece of paper, and you start writing down, going over the major things happening in the day, and say, okay, how did I react to this? Did I do the right thing? Did I react well? If I didn't, what happened, and what am I going to do better next? And the idea is to critically reflect on your own behavior and try to figure out ways to improve it for the next time. And that's it. Thanks very much. All right, we're on a little bit over time, but we started late, so we had several minutes for Q&A. So, remember the first question, good question, not really fun. Get a free book. Yeah.
Do you think that current like Western society by becoming stoic or just becoming unethical has become harder over time? And if so, what do you think is the thing that is making it harder?
This is a very good question. So we have the book. Let's see. I think every society, it has always been hard. In this sense of term. So I have to remember, ethical here doesn't just mean the right thing. It means constantly reasoning correctly and cooperate with other people. Right? So to be an excellent human being is difficult. It's always been difficult, but yes, there are times where that gets more or less of a challenge, right? I think modern society, 21st century Western society, especially American society in particular, yeah, presents some unique challenges. One of which a number of sociologists are getting interested in from an empirical perspective, and that is the effect of social media. We all like to, dismiss social media about all. Lots of people these days are negative to social media, but there's good reasons for it. Social media is a great idea. I think be in touch with friends and relatives all over the world, meet strangers all over the world. You can talk about the entire kinds of conversation. That's unfair. In practice, however, it's actually a lot of nastiness and all of that, essentially. And one of the turning points, according to Jonathan Haidt, who is a sociologist at NYU, one of the turning points was Facebook's discovery or invention of the angry button. If you remember, I don't know, you actually go on Facebook, because Facebook is losing its track, especially new generations. But it used to be that you could only like or not. It was only like. And then they added a bunch of other things, the hot button, the low button. And then they discovered that the angry button actually drives 10 times more traffic than any of the other buttons, because people really like to get angry. And of course, driving traffic means undercuts and therefore revenue. According to Haidt, that has been a turning point. It's been a major reason why, not the only reason, sure, but why this course has gone down the drain very quickly. So yeah, that's more difficult. That makes it more difficult. When everybody else is shouting in the room, it makes it difficult for you to be the one who keeps their cool in the temper. But then the flip side of that coin is, oh, Epictetus would say, that's yet another exercise. It's an opportunity for practice. Being on social media is an opportunity to practice countering justice, courage, and wisdom. So it can go either way. But I would say at the moment we are going through a period of, extremely polarized political environment. This is not just an impression. This is born by data. Political scientists have shown that they have quantitative evidence for political polarization in the country. And this being right now, this is the worst that it has been since at least the 60s. And that comes out. And in fact, it has increased polarization. So everybody gets angry, everybody thinks they're absolutely right, everybody thinks that the other side is strong and evil and firm and all that stuff. It's not good. So yeah, but that's of course the reason you do it, right? Right. Seneca at one point says, everyone is a good pilot if the sea is calm. When the storm comes, they're going to see the difference between those that get still and those that are not. So we are going through a series of storms. This is really not practice. Yeah.
What are your thoughts on Marcus Aurelius' meditation in regards to
Position as a ruler? Okay, good question there, Jim. So Marcus Aurelius is an interesting figure because he was literally an emperor philosopher king, as Plato would put it. And he had a huge amount of responsibility. One thing that we need to remember when we are talking about historical figures like Marcus is that we should refrain from applying modern standards of conduct and behavior to a completely different culture that operated by different standards. So, for instance, the obvious, the Roman Empire was based, like every other empire at the time, was based on slavery. A ruler today thinks that that's okay, not a virtue, right? Not a good thing. Now, so why did Marcus not abolish slavery? Because it would have been impossible. The entire economy would have collapsed and would have been killed overnight. Because people just would not have accepted that. What he did do, interestingly, he passed a number of laws that made life for enslaved people significantly better. So you have to look at it from the point of view of that culture. So was he above the average of that culture was below what was in right on there. And by those standards, then Marcus was a very good. The wars, for instance, I mentioned that he engaged in 2 wars. They were both defensive. So he made a conscious decision not to try to expand the borders of the Roman Empire. He did not initiate wars. But when people try to beat you up and come to your home, then you have to do something about it. And he did. When he was threatened by a lieutenant who tried to declare himself emperor, essentially, so he had a revolt inside the house. There too, he acted in a very tempered fashion. First of all, he went to the Senate and asked for permission, which he didn't need. But he went to the Senate and asked for permission to deal with this question. Once the guy was defeated, he spared his entire family. The noble stuff at the time was, if you're trying to become emperor and fail, then your entire family is gone, because I cannot afford to have your children around flying for revenge. Marcus, on the other hand, not only did not kill anybody in the guy's family, but it allowed them to keep their property, their titles, etc., which is, again, by the standards of the time. So I would say that Marcus Aurelius was a very good ruler overall. He certainly did do things that even he thought were not particularly good. If you read Meditations, for instance, over and over the visual anger comes up. He's conscious of having an anger issue. And as an emperor, that's dangerous, because you get angry with somebody and easily chop their head off. We don't have any record of him ever doing that. But certainly other emperors have done that. And so he's conscious of it and he's working on it. And he needs to remind himself that, you have a lot of power. And therefore, you need to be particularly careful about your emotional reactions, because they're going to affect other people. Yeah.
Let's do one more question.
Sure. Yes.
You mentioned when you were talking about courage, like a Nazi can be courageous because like a Nazi soldier can be courageous for sort of wrong reasons. On the same note, do you believe that any soldier could really be courageous because it's determined like if it's good on the society they belong to, and like that telling people in general is not very good.
Yeah. So if I had a third book, you would get it, because that's a good question. I don't, sorry. So yeah, the question of soldiers and the ethics of soldiers. So there is a lot of literature there. There is such a thing as military ethics. Because people work on it. One of my colleagues, Nancy Sherman, actually writes about stories in Greco-Roman philosophy, and she teaches at military colleges. This is a real question. It's a very important thing. So there is a tension inherent in being a soldier, right? Because by definition, you're supposed to follow orders. If every soldier started thinking on themselves, we didn't have an army, we would have a community, and those are not really very good at fighting against. On the other hand, you also have presumably the conscience of a human being, right? You're trying to be a good person and you're trying to do your best. So there is going to be a trade-off. Sometimes you will have to do things that you personally object to, and that that you wouldn't do otherwise. And yet it will be too disruptive to the entire effort, in which you presumably believe what you joined. I'm talking ideally, because people join the military for all sorts of reasons. Most of them, a lot of them have nothing to do with doing the right thing. But if you join because you want to actually contribute and then do the right thing, then you're going to find yourself, at least from time to time, in a conundrum. And I think the answer that virtual ethics gives there is there is no rule by which you can go. It's up to you to decide where that threshold is. There is a point beyond which you're just not going to go, and you will desert, or you will object, or you will. And we have examples of this. One of the most famous ones was a helicopter pilot during the Vietnam War, who was basically ordered to contribute to killing the Russian civilians near the end of the war, and he said he put his helicopter right in the middle between the civilians and the rest of the platoon and stopped what a really massacre. He was court martialed as a result. He knew that was going to happen, right? But that for him was crossing lines, like, no, sorry, I've done other things, that I probably wouldn't have done, or I probably will regret for as well, but this one is not, it's just not. But it takes courage, a lot of courage, because there's gonna be consequences, right? Serious consequences. So there's no universal answer. I think that is one reason why before deciding to enlist, one should really think very, very carefully about the very limited latitude that you're gonna have to make your own decisions. You're essentially, by enlisting, you're essentially giving up a large chunk of your agency. And according to what we did is, our agency is what makes us human. That's who we are. The decision, if Epictetus were to be asked, what do you think is the essence of the thing, he would say it's your decisions, your decision-making ability. He actually has a word for that, he calls it the ruling factor. Marcus Aurelius uses the same. So if you give up control over your ruling faculty, that's a big one. And so before you do that, you should definitely very, very seriously consider whether that is what the trade-off is worth it. And what would you do if you ever find yourself in a situation where you're being ordered to do something that your opinion is absolutely unacceptable? Would you be willing to go through the decision and solve it?
Thank you very much.
Yeah.